Alrighty, so sorry for the redux, but the last video on this same subject, the audio went a little haywire. So we are revisiting the modern effeminate Christian male, and I found this, just so happened to run into it a week ago, and I thought this was incredibly relevant, and especially more relevant today than it first came out. It says 6 years ago. This is a 6-year-old video. So without further ado, let's just dive in. He's going to go into what I think is the cornerstone of a lot of cultural issues when it comes to mainstream Christianity, and especially what we consider now, and I'm going to dive in, give you my own take, because he's going to roast a lot of what I consider style nowadays, and especially if you look at me, bro. I dyed my hair blonde. I'm trying to stand out, trying to color my feathers per se, but let's go ahead and dive in. This is by the Living Water Bible Church. I'll leave a description in the, I'll leave a link in the description below so you can check that out.
Okay, well, we are going to be opening up our Bibles here in a moment together to the book of Genesis, chapter 1. This should be the easiest scripture reference I've ever given to find. So if you want to do that now, you can turn to Genesis chapter 1. We're going to be reading verses 26 and 27 this morning. But this morning, we're going to be launching into our new sermon series, as I've already sent out an email, and of course, even before service began, to let you know where we're going. I hope that each of you were able to read that email this week, because we will be talking about some topics this morning that our children are going to probably have questions about, and so just want you to be prepared to be able to answer those questions in an age-appropriate way. But I've entitled the sermon this morning, The Modern Effeminate Christian Male. And we're going to be diving into this topic of how the church has become so effeminized over the past several decades. It really began in the 60s, maybe a little bit before that. And what that's caused and where we are as a culture now, because the men of this culture, specifically the men of the church, have basically become weaklings. Actually, I was reminded of a story this week, or reminded of a story from history this week that really helps us understand what has happened. We don't really understand how popular culture, literally can be culture changing. Many of you know of the Cold War between the USSR, the former Soviet Union, and the United States, especially those of you who grew up, the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It was a big deal. And many of us also know that Germany was divided into two, the East and the West, by something called the Berlin Wall. Now, America and the USSR were in a bitter Cold War, threats for years and years, decades. And most of us don't realize the thing that finally brought down the Soviet Union. And this is so interesting and so important. You see, we couldn't give any more threats to the Soviet Union. We couldn't make any more nuclear weapons to intimidate them. That had all been done. That had all been tried. There had been countless talks, countless summits. And yet in the late 80s, something came out of America that actually finally brought the fall of the Soviet Union. And you know what that is, church? Popular culture. Popular culture.
It's funny because popular culture, it was only really possible with televised culture, wasn't it? That sort of mainstream, Americanized, global culture.
The Soviet Union, specifically the Eastern Germany, under Soviet rule, was so hungry for American popular culture that they began bootlegging American music, bootlegging American television. And the Soviet Union knew it was a problem, so they tried to crack down on it. It became so widespread that by the end of the 80s, popular culture, American popular culture, had literally changed the minds, the understandings of the entire country, so to speak, of Eastern Germany. And that is what began to precipitate the fall of the Soviet Union. Their minds changed. They became invaded by a culture that was so unlike their own and so sinful, by the way, that they wanted more and more and more and more.
Well, I think I get what he's talking about, but in that respect, the essentially like the American message was this like beautifully, mostly capitalistic, but most basically free, and you kind of have this liberated version of reality. Like that was basically what was underlying all that. I get where he's coming from, though. It is like this pop culture is still sinful with its sexualized revolution and all this other jazz, but like that message was still a very important part of all that. Was this the idea of like this liberated society who is free to do whatever they want? So just to be fair,
It's an interesting story, very interesting story. If you ever want to look into that, there are several books written on the topic. But popular culture, and American popular culture specifically, is credited with the final blow to the Soviet Union. It's very interesting. But I also want to say something to you this morning. The church this morning stands upon a knife's edge, brothers and sisters.
yeah.
The knife's edge. And we are perilously close to falling what I'm naming the abyss of post-Christian feminism in this country. Now, the world, the carnal man, is already hook, line, and sinker taking this. But brothers and sisters, we need to understand that the church is right on the doorstep. And I would say many churches are already in the free fall.
I would say it's pretty much there. This message was said 6 years ago. It's pretty much done. It's already been done. It really is to me. Like that's how I feel. You can't be a dude's dude. You can't be you can't be like a dude. Like you can't like cigar smoking. Maybe you got the leather jacket riding up on your bike to the church, bro. Like you can't be a dude's dude at church nowadays, especially when it's like a mega church, one of these big mega churches. Because the message has to be flatlined. Everything needs to be placated to the wider audience. Pop culture.
Where the effeminate male has become what defines their denominations and their congregations.
I feel personally attacked.
Gone are the days, brothers and sisters, where mighty men, mighty Christian soldiers of the faith go forth into the culture to invade the culture with truth. And what's happened is popular American culture has invaded the church, has invaded the pew, has invaded the pulpit, has invaded our music, has invaded everything.
It's low-key true.
Brothers and sisters, where are the men that are willing to go forth into the culture and defeat the depravity that this culture is defined by? Where did they go? We're going to examine some of that this morning to kind of kick off this whole sermon series. We need to know where we've been and how we got to this point before we can understand what we must do. That's my question this morning. Where are the men, church? Where are the men that are willing to go to battle as warriors for Christ against the darkness of this present age? I will say this. For the most part, gone are those men. Those bold, those courageous men, which we'll talk about next week with Joshua, where God said, be strong and courageous. Where are those men, church? Where did they go?
They kicked them out. They're uninvited in these places because churches nowadays just placate to women. That is for the most part 90% true. It is what it is. They're meant for children and the woman. Okay. There's not really much for a dude's dude to do at a church, man. There ain't much for us there, honestly. And he's going to go into depth. Again, there's going to be a part where he torches me because I think he would have a fucking... Okay, anyway, let's move forward.
I'm going to even say this. For the most part in our culture, especially as we examine the younger generation, gone are the men who dress like men, who look like men, who act like men, who speak like men, who take responsibility for their family and for the church like men. Gone are those men. And in their place, Satan has created a breed of man that looks nothing like the biblical version. And yes, even down to dress. Now, some of these pictures I'm going to show you this morning might be a little offensive because I'm going to show you pictures of popular Christian artists. But brothers and sisters, we need to understand that Satan has twisted the way we think about manhood so much to the point that we don't even recognize an effeminate man anymore when we see one. We just think it's trend. It's just the trends and the styles of the day. So I'm going to show you a few pictures here this morning of a very popular style and trend of clothing in men. Now, that's not the only thing we're going to talk about this morning, but just to give you an idea of how invasive the culture has been, the popular culture has been, that men in the church dress like, and I'm going to say this just the way it is, dress like homosexuals outside of the church. They dress like homosexuals. And I'm going to show you a few pictures of what I mean.
This is why I canceled
Oh,
my subscription.
I thought
After months spending way too much
I thought
on
I got rid
DoorDash,
of This guy over here, his name's Trey Pearson. He is a homosexual Christian artist, by the way, which is an oxymoron. I understand that. And on the other side is Phil Wickham, a guy that we know, most of us know very well. You can't tell the difference between the two. One of them is a homosexual and dresses like one. The other one dresses like a homosexual, but isn't one. Let's look at the next slide. Tight jeans is kind of the style of the day. We just look at it, oh, it's just a trend. It's just a style. It's not, church.
I remember
it is
that.
effeminate. It is girly. It is.
I remember that. I had a skateboarding phase when I was growing up. I got the tightest jeans I could possibly find, bro. And slim fit stuff is still kind of what's in nowadays.
Not manly dress. Let's look at the next. By the way, that guy's the pastor of Hillsong Church in New York, which is, again, a completely heretical church. Let's go to the next one here. These are men.
Inspired.
These are men in our culture, especially our millennial generation. This is how they're dressing. This is what they're wearing, many of them. Let's look at the final slide here. And I don't have to say much about the hairstyles here, but church, we need to understand that Satan will invade the culture through popular culture any way he can. Who are the clothing designers of the day? Who are the hairstylists that are cutting the edge and the trend in hairstyles of the day, brothers and sisters? The vast majority are homosexuals. The vast majority.
Okay, to be fair, I get where he's going at, and I do find it an issue too. Like it is kind of concerning, this culture. But what I think that most older married Christian men don't quite understand about what's happened in the dating market, what they really, just because they've been out the game for so long, what they don't understand is the crazy change in dynamics and in gender roles that are happening, especially in the West. Because in the West, women don't particularly need men, and on the surface level, this is true. They say, and if you just look at like TikTok content all the time, right? Most women kind of reiterate that constantly, and it's kind of true. Obviously, though, you think it through. Obviously, they need men to enforce the law, to enforce policing the streets, right? To defend the country, to go to war, to uphold the infrastructure that holds up a society, right? Obviously, that much is true. But a woman nowadays doesn't technically need a man. Modernity has provided her, and especially men have provided her, comfort and security because she can rely on the state to provide her protection. So what that does is a woman can go her whole life without really ever relying on a one man. So what does that leave men to do? That leaves us basically going MGTOW and basically living our own single lives. And all we can do really in this new dynamic place is beautify and glamorize and essentially stylize, color your wings, color your feathers, because guys are going to do what they got to do to stand out. So this is one thing I think most married older Christian men don't quite understand about this sort of what appears to be the outward effeminization, which to me is style, and then there is also, unfortunately, like behavioral aspects that come along later, which I think he's mostly alluding to.
And these are their styles. These are what they're producing. These are what they're making, and guess what the church is doing? Wearing it. Styling their hair, hook, line, and sinker, taking all of popular culture. Now, I understand this is a surface thing, church, but it's looked at as a surface thing, but I don't think it is. It shows what we are truly looking at, what we are truly trying to do. Are we trying to honor the Lord and be men, or are we trying to look like the culture tells us that we have to look like? Dress like the culture. What is the culture going to tell you to dress like? In a godly way, church? Look at the women of this culture. Do they dress in a godly way?
Nope.
Of course not.
Nope.
Brothers and sisters, the men of the church do not either. They dress like women. They dress like girls, and they are consumed with vanity.
Okay, so how he goes in on the style of men. Obviously, he's focusing on men, and that's the key part that he doesn't understand, is why men are stylizing themselves in this way in today's dynamics. But here's one thing that I find incredibly frustrating and annoying when it comes to modern women and the church. The church doesn't call out modern women for sexualizing themselves. Like I will literally, like before I bounced from one of the mega churches, I will literally see girls come and go who essentially are posting themselves half naked regularly, bikini photos, all this jazz, right? And they show up to church like it's nothing, like nothing happened. Okay. I mean, if that's the way we're going to go and no one's going to say anything about it, see, like the double standard to me is kind of ridiculous.
Christian music, it's the easiest target because there's so many pictures to find. I could have showed you a whole lot more pictures of Christian artists looking like women, dressing like girls, looking effeminate. Now, I gave you these pictures not to condemn some of these men. I'm not saying Phil Wickham's not a Christian. What I'm saying is he's dressing like a homosexual. He is, period. Why is that? Why has the culture invaded our pews? Why has the culture invaded our stage? Why do we look at the culture to give us cues on how we ought to do our hair, how we ought to dress, how we ought to carry ourselves? Look at tattoos of the day, church. What is tattoo? Vanity. It is vanity. If you have a tattoo, I'm sorry, you might be mad at me. It is vain. You got that tattoo for vanity purpose because the culture tells you it's either That's why you got it. Let's look at the next slide here. This is Genesis 1.
Most people do that. I got mine because of trauma. It's either that or therapy, but this one's $80. I was like, all right, let's go.
And I'm going to talk about that more in a moment. Genesis 1, 26 through 27. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. According to our likeness. And let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over the cattle of all the earth. Listen, church, I'm going to stop here a moment. The modern effeminate male, do you think he looks like God would call him to look? Acts like God calls him to act? Is he acting like a man who is given rule over all of creation? A man who is strong and mighty? Think about that question as we continue. This is the dominion mandate, church, by the way, where God gives man rule. Man rule.
That's a quick way to flesh out a feminist right there. In any case, you pulled out the Bible in that respect. That's a quick way to flesh out a feminist.
We've been given rule over the sky and over the cattle and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created him. You see, brothers and sisters, it is God who created us male and female. And so therefore, guess who gets to decide what is male and what is female? Guess who gets to decide what is a manly trait, an attribute, and what is not? God does. And you know what the culture has done, church? The church has done, they've looked to the culture to define what a man is. They have looked to the culture to define what a man should look like, dress like, act like. But brothers and sisters, God makes it very clear. I made man in my image. And since I did, I define what manhood is. Church, we have to stop looking to the culture to define manhood. Like I said, you may think dress is a small matter. It's not, church. Dress, I think, is the final straw. Dress shows us just how hook, line, and sinker we have taken this effeminate culture to heart as a church.
I wouldn't say as far as style would be the hook, line, and sinker that he's talking about. I do feel that if you're going to be a prominent male masculine figure, that probably, like, let's not look to pop culture to emulate and showcase what that should be, of course. But in the general sense, like dressing a certain way is pretty much the only way guys have nowadays to stand out in this dating market, bro, because she doesn't need you. She can rely on the state to enforce whatever the hell she needs to enforce. The laws are low-key a little against men in the West. Nonetheless, let's just keep seeing what he's got to say. I do find this interesting.
And over the course of the coming months, church, we're going to look at what it means in a God-defined way to be a male and to be a female. Not in the culture, not what the culture defines. And unfortunately, our view has been distorted so drastically by pulp culture that I think many of us don't even recognize the difference between an effeminate male anymore. We just think that is manhood. This is what men are. They are effeminate weaklings. They are effeminate dogs. It's kind of funny. Last night I was flipping through the channels late. Steph and I were watching a hockey game, and We came across that movie Tombstone. You remember that movie Tombstone? Have you seen it? Val Kilmer and was it Kurt Russell? And in the beginning of this movie, this carriage comes into town with these thespians, you know, these actors that are going to come in and they're going to do a play for the town of Tombstone. And out steps this very effeminate man. He's an actor. I don't know if you remember that scene, but out steps this very effeminate man. And when he steps out into the street and looks around, he is surrounded by manly men, these cowboys, these Wild West manly men. Now, I'm not saying that all these men were Christian. What I'm saying is there was a shock to the men standing around to see this effeminate man step out of this carriage. Church, that doesn't shock us anymore. The shock is to see a manly man in this culture. It's flipped. It's literally the opposite.
So
and that just struck me last night. I didn't have it in my sermon, but it struck me last night to say, out steps this effeminate man, and instantly he's recognized there's something very effeminate about this man as he's surrounded by these strong Wild West type figure men.
This is so true. So I'm 29 and looking for like the masculine classic mentor, the wise old man, essentially, right? For like leadership, someone with the psychic instruments to maybe move me further in life. Looking for that archetypal classical figure of the masculine in my own life. Basically, never happened. Basically, it's never happened. It's kind of sad. And again, I am a little biased, right? I'm an artist. I never went to the military, so this is a lot that I didn't get to quite put myself in a position that way, but it's just kind of interesting that, you know, so when I go out to dance, I do Latin dancing, you're going to find more of what he's talking about. And in business places too, is just this sort of, you just feel, it's just this feeling you get from men nowadays, that classic James Bond masculine archetype. It's gone. It's gone.
Brothers and sisters, we have been created, male and female, in the image of God. And you know who hates the image of God more than anything? Satan hates the image of God. Satan hates God with a passion. But brothers and sisters, Satan has no power over God. And so it's the next best thing, church, that Satan can distort, that Satan can destroy, that Satan can attack, the one who is created in the image of him, and that's man. And so Satan has thrown all his weight behind, all his fury behind destroying the image of a godly man in this culture, and actually in every culture throughout the ages. The fall of the Roman Empire, the historians will tell you all sorts of things, but church, it was the fall of masculinity that destroyed the Roman Empire. The fall of masculinity. They were unable to defend themselves because they became a culture of effeminate homosexuals.
Damn. You don't hear pastors giving sermons like that no more, bro. Like this guy was anyway, like, okay. Obviously, I think what he's trying to do is give this like grand overarching what it was that brought the fall to the Roman Empire. But there was so much that went into that, right? You can go from taxations, overtaxing the population, the inflation, hiring basically soldiers from everywhere else, to the point where like no one was Roman who was in their military and policing the streets. No one was Roman, and then they just degraded the Roman identity. Like no one cared to say, I am a Roman man, right? Like that, all that shit just withered away. So there's so much that goes into it, but I think that's a fair assertion to say that masculinity was eroded over time. I think that's a fair assertion. But obviously so much more nuanced.
And brothers and sisters, Satan has been on an assault of epic proportions against manhood specifically. In his end game, his final goal, church, is to destroy the very godly definition of what it means to be male. Now, I'm not saying he's not working against females too, because he is, but what do you do when you want to strike and ruin? You strike the head, don't you? You crush the head first, and that's what Satan has done.
Yep.
He has thrown his fury into an assault on biblical manhood. And we as a church have taken it, like I said, hook, line, and sinker. Yep. If you strike the head, you destroy the body. Satan knows that God gave rule of creation to man. He knows it all too well. He knows that man was given the rule of woman. He knows that all too well. God knows that when men are...
Yep, just a quick thought, because I've seen this happen more and more. There are so many more churches that basically allow women to give sermons, to preach, to teach biblical messages. And look, I find it whatever, but clearly the Bible does not say that's the thing. Like, if you're gonna teach biblical messages, in the Bible it says women should not teach the message. You should not. They shouldn't be preachers, giving sermons, nothing like that. It's in the book. It's in the book. So I don't particularly think that's a good idea. Nonetheless,
strong, when men are courageous, when men are godly, when men are compelled by their love for their family and their church and their God, that the gates of hell cannot prevail against any attempt Satan has to destroy them. When men are strong, our wives are strong, our families are strong, our church is strong, and our culture is strong. Yep. Satan knows that, and so he's going to strike the head.
One more thought. Sorry, I know. But here's the thing, like, in today's dating market, here's the thing that most people it just astounds me how obvious this is. Are there men that are lazy? Sure. Are there men that aren't good men? Okay, yes, right. Are there men who go into power and they basically get debauched, right? Like, they're not the same? Yes. But for the most part, on average, the average dude, when you give a man responsibility, power, and authority, what he winds up doing, especially financially, he'll turn around and go, now I can afford a family. But it's not the same. And I can't believe this is like even surprising. What happens when you give a woman power and especially financial freedom? You improve them financially, you improve them in all these such ways. They turn around and go, now I don't need a man. And now I can travel. Now I can ride as many chads throughout the world as much as possible. And now I can essentially, I'll just buy a baby from the sperm bank and raise him myself. So you don't help the whole societal familial structure as a unit. You don't help that society out by continuously placating to women. When you help the average man, that society gets better.
And so Satan has attacked manhood with a fury from every angle he can think of. And it began, from what I can tell, in the late 50s, early 60s in this country. The rise of feminism, where Satan convinced women that it was their right and their destiny to rule over man. Many of us know that from Genesis chapter 3. The curse of the woman will be to rule over her husband. She will desire that. And then God says, but man will rule over you.
They're doing a pretty good job of it today. It's kind of concerning.
Want it. They want the position that has been given to men. And so feminism arose in this country, particularly in the late 50s and into the early 60s. They saw it as their destiny and in their best interest, these women, to rule over men, to belittle them, to treat masculinity as a disease. And church, isn't that the case in our culture today? Masculinity is considered a disease that needs to be cured. That's literally where we are at today. A disease that needs cured. They began to belittle them, to loathe them, and that began the tailspin that we are reaping the unholy harvest of today. Since the 60s, there has been a dedicated and calculated assault on manhood, biblical manhood in particular, what it truly means to be male. But it didn't end there, church. That was the beginning of the assault in the beginning of the 60s with feminism. As women began to be deceived that men were expendable, Satan next went after the family. He convinced men that their role in the family wasn't important. He convinced women their role wasn't important. And he used this in his feminist pawns to destroy the idea of the nuclear family. The man, the woman, the children. He transformed our culture's idea out of this. He transformed the culture's idea of sex from one of beautiful expression of love between a husband and wife to lust-filled fornication and self-seeking pleasure. That's what came out of the 60s movement. Sex was no longer to be shared intimately between
became a commodity. That's essentially what happened. Sex became a commodity along with everything else. Relationships are a commodity now too. Everything is digitized and commoditized. It's just what happens with hyper-capitalistic societies at this point. And we are taking that experiment all the way, baby, all the way to the finish line. That's what America is definitely doing. It is what it is. But anyway, if you want to see the rest of it, I'll leave a link in. Again, it's called The Modern Effeminate Christian Male. If you want to see the rest of it, go ahead. It's really rather fascinating to me, but I'll leave a link in the description below. Alrighty, guys. Deuces.